Emma Caldwell didn't look like someone who could change the course of a multimillion-dollar company overnight, but that was exactly what made her so effective. At 38, Emma had built a sterling reputation as one of Boston's most brilliant investment strategists. A black woman in a predominantly white, male-dominated field, she had learned long ago that real power didn't need to be loud. It just needed to be precise. With her calm demeanor, shoulder-length natural curls, and warm brown skin framed by a gray cashmere sweater and comfortable slacks, Emma moved through Logan International Airport unnoticed, just the way she intended. This wasn't an ordinary business trip. As the third-largest individual shareholder in Atlantic Star Airlines, Emma had grown increasingly concerned about the company's rapid decline in customer satisfaction. Instead of simply reviewing reports or attending polished boardroom presentations, she decided to step into the shoes of a regular customer. Her idea of a mystery passenger program had been approved by the board, but no one knew she'd volunteered to be the first test case herself. As she walked toward the premium check-in area, the voice of her assistant, Marcus Reed, came through her discreet earpiece. "Miss Caldwell, the board meeting is set for tomorrow at 9 a.m. All major shareholders confirmed. Also, preliminary reports on customer experience just came in." Emma's voice remained low as she navigated past families, business travelers, and airport kiosks. "And? Not good," Marcus replied. "Complaints are up again this quarter. Discrimination. Inconsistent service. Priority upgrades denied without reason." Emma gave a small nod. "That's exactly why I'm here." At the first-class check-in desk, she handed over her boarding pass and ID to a young woman who barely glanced at her. The attendant's tone was polite but mechanical. "Reason for travel, ma'am?" "Business," Emma replied evenly. Without much warmth, the attendant returned her documents. "Gate 27B. Boarding begins in 40 minutes. Emma thanked her, adjusted her laptop bag on her shoulder, and moved toward security. Her carry-on was light, just the essentials, a change of clothes, her notebook, and her laptop. But what she carried that no one could see was far more powerful: a sharp eye, a strategist's patience, and a mission to uncover the truth. After clearing TSA, she passed the luxury boutiques and upscale restaurants lining the terminal, eventually arriving at the Atlantic Star first-class lounge. Once celebrated as a hallmark of the airline's elite experience, recent reports had described it as outdated and poorly staffed. Emma presented her pass to the lounge receptionist, a young man who greeted her with a smile. "Welcome, Miss Caldwell. Enjoy your stay." Inside, she quietly observed. Attendants hovered near business travelers in tailored suits, offering champagne and small talk. Yet those dressed more casually, like a woman in scrubs or a retiree in jeans, were largely ignored. Emma made mental notes. Selective treatment. Understaffed. Visual profiling. As she sipped lukewarm coffee and glanced around the half-empty lounge, she knew one thing for sure: this wasn't about customer service anymore. It was about respect. And tomorrow, she would make sure the entire boardroom heard that message, loud and clear. By the time Emma Caldwell arrived at Gate 27B, the boarding area was already filling up. She stood quietly to the side, her gray sweater blending into the background. But her eyes were sharp, watchful. This was the next stage of her silent investigation. Just ahead of her, an elderly couple approached the gate. The woman, perhaps in her 70s, leaned on a cane while her husband carefully carried both of their boarding passes. They smiled politely at the gate agent, Lindsay Carter, a woman in her early 30s with a crisp white blazer and a frosty smile to match. "I'm sorry," Lindsay said curtly, not even bothering to look up fully. We've already begun boarding premium passengers. Please wait over there." Emma's brow furrowed slightly. She watched as the couple obediently stepped aside, confusion on their faces. Moments later, a sharply dressed man in a tailored navy suit walked up to the counter. Lindsay's demeanor changed instantly. "Right this way, sir. We hope you enjoy your flight," she cooed, scanning his pass and guiding him through without hesitation. The contrast was glaring. Emma stepped forward next. Calmly, she handed Lindsay her first-class boarding pass. The agent glanced down, then looked up, this time, lingering. "First class?" Lindsay asked, her voice laced with doubt. "Yes," Emma answered softly. Lindsay's perfectly arched eyebrows rose. "Are you sure you're at the correct gate? This line is for first-class boarding." Emma remained composed. "I'm aware. My boarding pass indicates seat 2A, first class." There was a pause. A long one. Lindsay examined the boarding pass again, as if hoping to find a flaw. She tapped her manicured nails against the keyboard, clearly stalling. Then came the words Emma anticipated. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step aside while we verify something on your ticket." Emma inhaled slowly, watching as several passengers glanced in their direction. She said nothing, simply stepped to the side as instructed. But she knew exactly what was happening. Over the next few minutes, Emma observed Lindsay wave through a series of well-dressed passengers, some chatting on phones, others sipping coffee. None were questioned. None were asked to step aside. 10 minutes passed. Emma returned to the counter. "Excuse me, I believe my flight is boarding." Lindsay didn't look up. "Ma'am, as I said, we're still verifying your ticket. First class is for premium customers." Her eyes traveled over Emma's sweater and comfortable pants again with thinly veiled disdain. "Perhaps there's been a mix-up." "There's no mistake," Emma said evenly. Lindsay sighed, picked up the phone, and turned away to whisper into the receiver. Occasionally, she glanced back at Emma like she was a nuisance, not a customer. Then came Brooke Simmons, the flight attendant. Blonde, polished, and brimming with silent judgment, she joined the scene. "Is there a problem?" Brooke asked Lindsay, eyes shifting to Emma with the same doubting look. "Miss Caldwell believes she's seated in first class," Lindsay replied coolly. Brooke didn't argue. Instead, she gently but firmly took Emma by the arm. "I'm going to have to ask you to wait outside the boarding area while we sort this out." Emma's jaw tensed. Wait outside. She could have made a scene. Revealed who she was. But that wasn't the mission. Instead, she stepped back, her voice calm. "I understand. But I'd like your employee numbers, please." The two women froze. Emma pulled out her phone and began documenting everything. Because this wasn't just about a seat. It was about a system that needed to be exposed. Emma Caldwell sat quietly in the terminal, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. Around her, the last of the first-class passengers boarded the plane with ease. She held a revised boarding pass in her hand, row 23, middle seat, courtesy of Lindsay Carter, who had offered it with a rehearsed apology and a forced smile. "This is the best we can do," Lindsay had said, as if she were offering a favor. Emma had accepted it without argument. She didn't need confrontation to make her point, she needed clarity. And now she had it. As she walked onto the aircraft, Emma passed by the first-class section she had paid for. Brooke Simmons stood at the entrance of the cabin, arms crossed, lips tight with smug satisfaction. Emma simply nodded as she passed, calm and composed. Brooke's expression flickered for a moment, clearly unsure how to read Emma's restraint. Emma made her way through the narrow aisle to the back of the plane. Seat 23B. Between a teenager with earbuds on one side and a man who immediately claimed both armrests on the other, Emma slid into the cramped space. She adjusted her posture, opened her notebook, and began writing. At the top of the page, she penned a single question. How systemic is the problem? She underlined it twice. Moments later, the drink service began. Emma pressed the call button and asked for a glass of water. 10 minutes passed. No one came. Meanwhile, she watched across the aisle as another passenger received service immediately. When she pressed the button again, Brooke finally approached. "You'll need to be patient," Brooke said flatly, her voice coated in irritation. "We're serving a full flight." No apology. No eye contact. Emma didn't respond. She simply marked another observation in her notes. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a pattern. She opened her laptop, angling the screen slightly for privacy. Once connected to a secure network, she logged into her company's internal database. Emma wasn't just a passive observer anymore, she was assembling a legal case. Customer satisfaction had plummeted 47% over the past 8 months, a timeline that perfectly aligned with the hiring of Diana Winters, the airline's new head of customer experience. Winters, with her luxury retail background and promises of premium rebranding, had implemented changes that looked glamorous on paper but left many passengers behind. Emma pulled up the dossier she'd started weeks ago, emails from former employees, comments from whistleblowers, and internal training documents that suggested staff were instructed to prioritize appearance over merit. A new message pinged from her assistant, Marcus Reed. It was a document she'd been waiting for, testimonies from 17 former employees, all describing similar experiences, discriminatory profiling, downgrading passengers who didn't look the part, and quietly encouraging staff to rebook or redirect those who didn't fit the airline's new image. Emma stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she clicked open another file, Atlantic Star's shareholder agreement. Specifically, Section 7.3. It stated that documented evidence of systematic discriminatory practices gave any major shareholder the right to call for an emergency board review and, if needed, demand executive removal. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then they moved swiftly. 3 emails. One to her legal team, prepare injunction paperwork under Section 7.3. One to the board secretary, I will be taking the floor tomorrow. First 20 minutes. Non-negotiable. One to her media contact, hold a public statement for 9 a.m. Emma then closed her laptop, leaned back, and glanced up the aisle. The plane hadn't even landed yet, but Atlantic Star Airlines' reckoning had already begun. The morning air in Manhattan was crisp as Emma Caldwell stepped into the sleek, glass-paneled lobby of Caldwell Investments, her company's headquarters on the 35th floor. She had arrived over an hour before sunrise, trading her soft cashmere sweater for a sharp charcoal gray pantsuit. Her hair was neatly pinned back, and her expression carried the weight of a woman on a mission. The plane ride from Boston to New York had been short, but the consequences of that journey were already in motion. Legal team is assembled in conference room 3, said Marcus Reed, her trusted assistant, handing her a steaming cup of coffee. I've uploaded all the documentation you requested. Also, the video from the gate, someone posted it online. Emma raised an eyebrow. How many views? Over 40,000 since last night. Caption reads, Black woman denied first-class boarding because she doesn't look the part. Classism in the skies. It's spreading fast. Emma nodded, unsurprised. And Atlantic Star's PR response? Standard press line, "We're reviewing the matter internally." They still don't know it was you. They will, she replied, her voice steady. Minutes later, she stepped into the boardroom where her inner circle awaited. Around the polished walnut table sat her general counsel Danielle Brooks, two data analysts Jason Ellis and Alyssa Grant, and her chief financial officer. The lights dimmed slightly as a digital presentation lit up the wall behind them. Emma stood at the front, her posture calm but commanding. "This isn't just about how I was treated yesterday," she began. "It's about how hundreds of passengers have been treated, dismissed, downgraded, and denied, based on how they look." Danielle leaned forward. "You experienced it firsthand, and we have the video, the boarding documents, timestamps, and employee IDs. But we'll need more than that to move against them legally." "That's where we come in," said Jason, clicking to the next slide. On screen appeared charts, bar graphs, and incident logs. Over the past quarter, 116 formal complaints matched the same pattern: selective service based on perceived status or appearance. Out of those, 43 cases include documentation, photos, receipts, witness statements. Alyssa jumped in. "And here's the smoking gun." The next slide displayed an internal email sent by Diana Winters, the airline's head of customer experience, to all regional flight crew supervisors. "First class is the cornerstone of our premium brand. Maintain an elevated aesthetic at all times. Use discretion with passengers who may not align with our high-value image." Emma's jaw tightened. "This isn't about brand," she said. "It's about bias, plain and simple." Danielle opened a folder. Section 7.3 of the shareholder agreement gives you the right to call an emergency meeting and demand removal of executives if you present evidence of ethical violations. Emma nodded. "That's what we'll do." Her CFO spoke next. "You control 22% of shares personally. We've quietly confirmed at least another 34% willing to back your proposal once they see this." "Then we have what we need," Emma said firmly. She glanced at the final slide, a recreation of yesterday's boarding area. Her team had even obtained the same outfit she'd worn. A moment of silence filled the room before Emma spoke again. "Time to remind them what quiet power looks like." At precisely 8:55 a.m., the mahogany doors to Atlantic Star Airlines' executive boardroom swung open. The room, perched high above the Manhattan skyline, was polished to perfection: leather chairs, crystal water glasses, and floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected a company still clinging to its image of luxury. What the board members weren't expecting was who walked through the door. Emma Caldwell, dressed not in a power suit, but in the same gray sweater and travel slacks she'd worn the day before, stepped confidently into the room. Her presence sent a ripple through the room. Several board members shifted in their seats. CEO Thomas Bradford quickly rose and extended his hand. "Miss Caldwell, this is unexpected," he said, feigning warmth. "We usually see your representatives at these meetings." "Today called for something more personal," Emma replied evenly, accepting his handshake. From the far side of the table, Diana Winters, the airline's head of customer experience, leaned over and whispered something to the man beside her, who chuckled under his breath. Emma noted it, but didn't respond. "Miss Caldwell has requested the first 20 minutes, said Chairman William Spencer, his voice firm. "The floor is yours." Emma walked to the head of the room, where a large screen had been prepared by her team. She held a remote in one hand, but her voice commanded the room without need for theatrics. "Before I begin, I have a question for Ms. Winters," she said, turning to Diana. Diana blinked. "Yes?" "Your new premium strategy," Does it include instructing staff to judge passengers based on how they look? The question hung in the air. I don't know what you mean, Diana replied, the edges of her smile straining. I see, Emma said calmly. Then let me show you. She pressed a button on the remote. The screen behind her came alive with video, the exact moment Emma was told to step aside at the boarding gate. The recording showed the condescension, the refusal, the final dismissal as she was escorted away while better-dressed passengers strolled past without issue. The boardroom went still. When the video ended, Emma turned back to the room. What you just saw is not unique. It's happening again and again under the direction of this leadership. Another click. The screen split into multiple panels, passenger complaints, witness videos, photographs, and the now viral clip taken by a stranger. On each screen, the same theme played out, discrimination cloaked in protocol. Then Emma revealed the internal memo. Maintain a premium aesthetic. Use discretion with passengers who may not align with our high-value image. Diana paled. I have 43 documented cases like mine, Emma continued. And according to Section 7.3 of our shareholder agreement, I have the right to demand immediate action. The airline's legal counsel glanced down at the documents in front of her, then gave a single nod. She's correct. Emma looked across the table. I'm calling for the immediate removal of Diana Winters, a public acknowledgement of these practices, and the implementation of a customer advocacy board to prevent this from happening again. Diana stood abruptly. This is absurd. You can't. I hold 22% of this company, Emma cut in. And I've secured the support of another 34%. The room erupted into murmurs. Emma stood still. This wasn't just a reckoning. It was a lesson in restraint, precision, and how quiet dignity could bring a giant to its knees. The atmosphere in the Atlantic Star boardroom had shifted from confident indifference to stunned silence. Emma Caldwell had not only delivered evidence, she had delivered a verdict. Diana Winters sat motionless, her lips pressed into a thin line, the internal memo still glowing on the large screen behind her. CEO Thomas Bradford looked visibly rattled, adjusting his tie as if the room had suddenly become too warm. Emma remained poised at the head of the table, her hands resting lightly on a leather folder that contained everything they needed to begin the transformation. Chairman William Spencer was the first to speak. Miss Caldwell, he said carefully, given the clarity and seriousness of your evidence, I believe this board has no choice but to take immediate action. He turned to the airline's legal counsel, who gave a single nod of confirmation. Per the shareholder agreement, with the voting shares now consolidated under Miss Caldwell and her affiliates, this motion can proceed. Emma didn't smile. Not yet. She knew the real work was only beginning. I recommend 3 actions, she stated. First, the removal of Diana Winters effective immediately. Second, a public statement acknowledging the discriminatory practices uncovered. And third, the creation of an independent customer advocacy board, empowered to oversee policy, employee conduct, and passenger treatment moving forward. Thomas Bradford leaned forward. What about reparations? I'm glad you asked, Emma replied. I've proposed a $10 million passenger equity fund, allocated to compensate affected individuals and support diversity and inclusion training for all frontline staff. There was a pause, then nods around the room. Even some of the board members who had initially doubted Emma's quiet authority now looked at her with a newfound respect. It wasn't just that she'd exposed a flaw in their operations, it was that she'd done it with clarity, precision, and without ever raising her voice. Just then, the glass doors opened and Emma's legal team entered, led by Danielle Brooks. They handed out documentation to each board member for immediate execution. Diana Winters stood up, her voice now brittle. "This isn't the end. You've made a scene, but this..." Emma raised her hand gently. "No, Ms. Winters. What I've done is bring the truth into daylight. And trust me, it speaks louder than any boardroom whisper ever could." The chairman signed the first document. "It's official," he said solemnly. Emma gathered her notes and prepared to leave, but before she did, she turned back to the room. This company once promised to treat every passenger with dignity. It failed. But today, we begin to rebuild not just a brand, but the trust that was broken. She paused, letting the message settle. "And I'll be watching." As she stepped out of the room, sunlight streamed through the hallway windows, casting long shadows behind her. Emma didn't need applause or headlines. She had done what she came to do, not just hold people accountable, but lay the groundwork for real, lasting change. The reform had begun, not with outrage, but with resolve. And it started with a black woman in a gray sweater who refused to be dismissed. 1 week later, Emma Caldwell stood once again inside Logan International Airport. The same concourse, the same terminal. But this time, everything felt different. Atlantic Star Airlines had undergone a stunning transformation, not just in operations, but in attitude. New signage had been installed above the first-class counter, "All guests welcome. All voices matter." It wasn't flashy, just clear. Intentional. More importantly, the people working beneath it reflected that same clarity. The woman at the counter this morning greeted Emma with a smile that felt real. "Good morning, Miss Caldwell. Your first-class seat is ready, and the lounge is just down the hall if you'd like to relax before boarding." Emma nodded politely. "Thank you. I think I'll do that." As she walked, she noticed the subtle but meaningful changes. The staff was more diverse now, not just in ethnicity, but in age, background, and demeanor. There was a quiet confidence in the way they carried themselves, as though they knew they were part of something bigger than just checking IDs and tagging luggage. In the departure lounge, Emma paused for a moment, scanning the room. The environment had shifted. She saw a young woman in a hoodie, an older couple holding hands, and a military veteran in uniform, all being treated with equal attention and respect. No more glances of judgment. No more being sized up by appearance. And then, just ahead of her, she noticed a familiar face. Brooke Simmons, the former first-class flight attendant who had once told Emma to wait outside, now stood near the economy check-in area. She wore the standard navy blue uniform but looked distinctly out of place. No longer issuing commands, Brooke now scanned boarding passes without much expression. When her eyes met Emma's, there was a flicker of recognition, followed by something more complex. Shock. Shame. Maybe even understanding. Emma offered a simple nod and continued walking, not out of arrogance, but from a place of peace. She hadn't sought revenge. What she sought, and achieved, was reform. At the gate, a new flight attendant, Angela Martinez, recently promoted under the airline's revised hiring program, greeted her warmly. "Welcome aboard, Miss Caldwell. We're honored to have you with us." Emma smiled and took her seat in first class. This time, no one questioned her presence. No one scanned her sweater for clues about her status. The service was offered with grace and consistency. Champagne was poured, coats collected, and names remembered. Before takeoff, Angela leaned down slightly and whispered, "We all know what you did. Thank you for speaking up. Things are better now." Emma nodded softly. "I didn't do it alone. But I'm glad the change is taking off. As the plane taxied toward the runway, she looked out the window at the Boston skyline fading into the distance. A chapter had closed, but what it represented was just beginning. This wasn't about proving herself. It was about proving that respect is not earned through appearances, but through presence, purpose, and quiet courage. Emma closed her eyes for a moment, the hum of the engines beneath her. She hadn't just boarded a plane. She had changed its direction. The story of Emma Caldwell reminds us that true strength doesn't always announce itself. It moves quietly, strategically, and with purpose. At a stage in life when many have faced subtle dismissals or moments of being overlooked, this tale strikes a familiar chord. For older adults especially, it reaffirms something deeply important. Dignity is not tied to what you wear or how loudly you speak, but to how you carry yourself when no one expects you to stand tall. Emma never raised her voice. She didn't demand attention with titles or credentials. Instead, she observed, she documented, and when the time was right, she acted. Her journey shows us that sometimes, the most powerful form of resistance is not confrontation, but preparation. And the most impactful change doesn't come from shouting, but from showing. This story encourages us to trust our experiences, speak truth with grace, and never underestimate the ripple effects of standing for what's right. In an age of viral outrage and quick tempers, Emma's calm clarity reminds us that wisdom, especially hard-earned over time, still matters. Her actions didn't just correct a wrong, they created a path for others to be treated better. For seniors who've spent a lifetime navigating society's shifting values, this is a powerful reminder: your presence still matters. Your voice, even when quiet, can transform boardrooms, policies, and hearts. Respect, after all, isn't something we chase, it's something we embody. So wherever you go, walk in with quiet confidence. Carry your story. You never know who might be watching, and how your dignity might just reshape the world around you.